Well, thanks everybody for sticking around. We'll save the, the best for last.
That was Freudian.
Least for, yeah, no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, no, we'll have imagine a little fireside chat. We should have moved it out to the pool with some patio heaters around us, but we'll just pretend. But thank you guys. I'll introduce briefly our esteemed panelists. But yeah, and so we'll just have a little chat. If anybody has questions, we can kind of bring those up as well. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, oh, you have the mic, yes.
Got the mic
Yep.
as well, so I can, if you have a question, I'll bring it over to you.
Yeah, we'll try to talk about some of the topics today in a little bit more detail, just kind of with their experiences at companies. But yeah, feel free to, if you guys have any questions or ideas of discussion topics, feel free to let us know. All right, Alaleh, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Alaleh Nouri. I'm the Chief Legal Officer at Procept Biorobotics. And Procept makes a robotic surgical device that uses highly pressurized water to resect tissue for the treatment of BPH. So that's in the prostate. So men's health device.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Bill?
Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Revelos, and until very recently, I've just left the company, but I was the Vice President and General Counsel at Corvista Health, a company based out of Toronto and Washington, D.C., working on a cardiovascular diagnostic product to look at artificial intelligence and machine-learned solution for diagnosing heart disease. And right now, I'm the principal at Insight Legal Services.
All right, Mike?
Hi, my name is Mike Pisetsky. I'm General Counsel at SI Bone. We make orthopedic implants focused on what we call the sacropelvic solutions area.
Thanks, guys. I like that we have a good mix of technologies. All right, so we'll start with thinking back to my speech on park doctrine. Just want to get, if you have any thoughts, anything come to mind, anything that you think you might do differently going forward, or any thoughts?
You know, from a startup perspective, this I have to admit, this was something that I really wasn't on my radar. I don't know about you all, but especially in a startup perspective, you don't think about these things. And when you're trying to build a company, maybe you've hired your first quality person, you're just trying to build a quality system, you're trying to get your infrastructure in place. What I think your presentation gave me the feeling for is that you better be hiring people with high integrity and people that you trust and that you really feel good about working with. And that goes for your boss, the CEO, and you know, you had said one of the directors, a director level person had been held liable. And so, you know, that just shows to me that up and down the organization, and this goes for any kind of compliance program, but when you talk about that doctrine, how can you avoid it? If justice is coming and they're threatening problems with you, or threatening this misdemeanor prosecution, and you might go to jail, you know, that horse has left the barn. You need to work at the very beginning to make sure that you trust the people you work with. And I would not touch with a 10-foot pole a company where I don't, you know, feel good about the people I work with.
Yeah,
because what else are you going to do?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yep. Anyone else? You don't feel obligated, but if you have any thoughts.
I didn't know a lot about the park doctrine until your presentation. I'm not going to lie. I was scared of the Yates memo, so at least I feel like something was on my radar.
Right.
I was thinking during your presentation a lot about separation of duties. I know there was the example where he delegated the duty, but at least knowing who's going to do what.
Yeah.
And so with respect to my role, you know, I review all the promotional materials and the marketing materials, and I was thinking about, well, I'm not the one validating and making sure the citations that are on that piece of paper support the statements that are being made. But it's very clear within our company who I expect to be checking all of that.
Yeah.
And make sure there's strength.
That's a really good point, especially outlining roles and responsibilities, who's in charge of what. I think that will help as well.
Make sure regulatory and quality don't report up through legal.
Yeah, yeah, there you go.
Exactly.
Another learning, good.
We also talked about, before we got up here, about, you know, looking at your indemnification provisions.
Oh, yeah, yep.
Right? You know, certainly the CEO tends to get the indemnity provisions that are, you know, really good for that person, but it's made me think, well, you got to look at the rest of your executive team, even down to the director levels, and you know, that may be a more interesting negotiation.
Yeah,
in the
absolutely. now you're better armed for negotiating. Okay, we'll switch gears. And I don't know, we didn't really talk about this beforehand, but do you guys do business in Europe? And if so, what's your experience? Do you have any reaction to what Cord and Oliver shared about either privacy or MDR?
So, yeah, we have multiple EU subsidiaries. It's been a real challenge. I think we're near the end of at least our MDR process for one product, but I think there's this real open question as to what the clinical experience or the data requirements are going to be for future products for us. It's the privacy is also a real challenge.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we have a product that's fairly simple from a privacy perspective, so we don't pass data back and forth. But even stuff as basic as HR data with our employees in Europe, it's a challenge. And the notified bodies, we've had to push and push to get the mind share that we need from our notified body.
Yeah, we have subsidiaries in Europe too, and Cord heard a lot from us several months back. A lot of phone calls, a lot of tapping into his expertise, but happy to say that we comply with MDR now, thanks to my team and Cord, and the regulatory team at our company. But it took a lot of back and forth with the notified bodies, and so.
Can you say how
lucky.
long it took or no?
What do you want to say, 18 months, 2 years?
Okay. And that's pretty consistent, it sounds like. Interesting.
I don't know, Cord, from what you said, I think I want to start a notified body company.
I know. Yeah, maybe.
There's a pretty big demand there.
Yeah, that's true. You'll have job security for at least 5 years or something. Okay, and kind of along the similar lines with Mike, you mentioned privacy, cybersecurity. It's a hot topic. Paul talked about it from an FDA perspective, but we also, you can think about it from a just privacy security internally. Do you guys does your company have cybersecurity risks? If so, what types of risks, or what are you doing to kind of mitigate risks from a cybersecurity perspective?
So even though we have a robot, thankfully today the robot's not connected to the network. So I feel like that's a little bit lower risk right now. I mean, I'm sure at some point in the future that I won't have the luxury of saying that. But I think cybersecurity is a risk everyone faces. Yeah. And in my experiences over the years, I've seen really smart people do things that they shouldn't do. I've had to help navigate situations where accounts payable paid an invoice that was fake and it looked really real, and it, former employee of a supplier went and created paper. Anyway, so, I think you have to pay attention to cybersecurity in general. One thing our head of IT did recently, which we thought was very interesting, is he sent out a faux phishing email and tested to see how the company responded, and
I like that.
It was really surprising. It looked like a typical phishing email, and it prompted the employees to log in, click here to change your Microsoft password.
Oh dear.
And it was really surprising how many people clicked and how many people tried to change their password.
I really like that idea.
Yeah, and it was simple. He didn't hire a third-party firm. They just created an
anything.
email, and then he presented it to the company and said, people.
What did everybody say? Oh my, yeah. That's a good way to learn.
Well, I'll give you a real-life example. The company before my last one, there was a real-life phishing attack, and I'm sure you all have been in these situations, but it was around tax time, and someone from the outside was posing as someone in the finance department, sent an email to the CFO, hey, can you give me access to the network? We got to get the W-2s ready for the tax returns. Sure, here it is. Here's the password.
Oh, jeez, yeah.
All of the Social Security numbers for 300 people went out, and most of our identities were stolen. And I'm still dealing with that. So, and I think it's important. What Paul was talking about on cybersecurity is, in the device context, and if you have a device that happens like my last company, Corvista Health, it has a lot of cybersecurity risks. It's a software as a service diagnostic. It's all in the cloud. And so we're thinking about product-related cybersecurity, but there's this corporate side too that everybody has to deal with, right? And it just makes it dizzying. We were very lucky at our company when I came on board at Core Vista Health. They had a chief information security officer, a CISO, and boy, I learned a lot from him. And it was fantastic to be able to, work together. And there's a privacy angle to that whole thing. And the product is still not on the market. But there's a lot of work to be done, and I think that's key, is to have some talented people in place.
How do you, in terms
Mike, sorry, the audience online.
Oh, they
wants
can't hear you.
Yeah, loud and proud.
Hold it up.
Thank you.
I'm curious for you guys, where's the reporting for cyber, privacy, legal, how organizationally, how do you line it up?
Right. The CISO reported to me, and I reported to the CEO. And then we had a VP of regulatory. We didn't have anybody privacy, no title for a privacy person, but so guess what?
Yeah.
I had the privacy
Lucky you.
responsibility as well. And it's a very small company. There are 40 or 50 people. So that org chart aspect of it, and as your compliance program evolves, I think that you have to be very careful looking at the org chart. Because I know what you're asking about. I mean, that's it's incredibly important to have good reporting lines and backups.
Yeah, I mean, we get the question. We get intense scrutiny of this at the board level. I mean, luckily on the product side, we sell titanium rods. So it's pretty basic, but the corporate side of it, and
Right.
we've had luckily nothing big, but small scale phishing attacks, and it's the focus of it's subject of a lot of energy for us, and legal working together with IT. And reporting every quarter to the audit committee and so forth.
One thing that I learned a lot in understanding how information security and cybersecurity works in that context is that you really have so much planning to do before you launch a product, and it really pays to invest in the infrastructure to work on that SOC 2 compliance, to do penetration testing, to look at your vendors to make sure that they're done. Even establishing contacts or relationships with law enforcement in case there's a problem, and get a relationship with them in advance. And the whole thing that Paul was talking about with the FDA guidance and really designing cyber security into your product, it's huge. And our CEO is very supportive of that. But if you don't have the budget and you don't have the attention, it
Then
can
it's
be
an
a challenge.
afterthought, and you're scrambling,
Right.
for submission at least. Yeah, we had, even at the firm, we've had phishing attempts where they'll text or email us and be like, "Hey, it's Tracy, can you go pick me up some gift cards?" And we all mess with them, but yeah, it's crazy. I do your companies do, so I like the idea of the fake phishing email. Is there like training or reminders on kind of what phishing is, what hacking is, that kind of thing too?
So we actually have a system or software that does the simulated phishing attacks.
Okay.
So all our employees regularly get kind of simulated phish emails.
Yeah.
And then they have to identify them right in Outlook. And then if you miss one, it takes you to a training.
Oh,
So,
okay. It's kind of cool. I've never heard of something like that.
So we have the online training that's annual, and then I think the people that clicked on this email are all going to get supplementary.
Yeah, they have to go to a boot camp on phishing. Oh, that's funny. All right, we'll switch gears. A couple of the poll questions we asked about clinical trials and enrolling, and also pre-market products. And I think we have a pretty big percentage of the audience that has pre-market. They haven't yet commercialized. So would like to get your guys' thoughts. Any lessons learned that you could share related to kind of getting into the commercialization phase? Anything you wish you would have known? Just any tidbits to share? Or war stories?
Everybody's looking at me. Yeah.
Somebody else wanna go.
Okay, well, I've been in several startups, and the getting regulatory approval for your first product has been, unfortunately for me, a very difficult thing. And when the economic climate shifts and you're in a fundraising mode, and then you're going sideways with the FDA, that can be difficult. So that's what I've recently experienced. And in the artificial intelligence, machine learning, software as a service context, we talked about this earlier. I think FDA is still trying to figure it out. I was looking, and I saw no less than 5 or 6 recent initiatives over the last 3 years, guidances, pilot programs, et cetera, that FDA has put out. We can have a great piece of software with a great validation plan. We've got all the statistical analyses. We've hired the right consultants to test it 10 ways to Sunday. And you get it in front of the FDA, you put a 5,000-page package in front of them, and they say, this looks great. And then, later they'll tell you something completely different. And my sense is, and I don't have any evidence of this, but they're still trying to figure it out as well.
Yeah.
And they may be happy, the individual reviewers may be happy with what you submit, but by the same token, they're looking at the industry and they're trying to have uniformity with the way they deal with the industry. Right. And so maybe sometimes the answers you get are not because of what you're doing, but it's because they're still trying to figure it out.
Right, and time passes between, they're shifting, they're learning too. So yeah, I can imagine that's a challenge for sure from a reg perspective.
Right.
You want to go, Mike? Or should I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hold your mic.
Go ahead.
So, couple things, I guess, obviously having your compliance program in place and getting your basic policies, just thinking proactively about that. Even further back, if you have a implantable product or a high-priced product or a new procedure, you want to think proactively about clinical, regulatory, and reimbursement, all three together. So, you can find you do the right studies to get through FDA, and then the payers want something different.
Yeah.
Right. So that can be a big issue. And then the final thing I'd say is you can think carefully about kind of international, because sometimes your commercial team sees it as an easy win, but it's a high workload for it's typically just less kind of payoff than the U.S. And guess where the workload falls?
Yeah. Well, and it used to be the case that you would always go to Europe first because it was faster and easier, and so now it's kind of shifting.
I was going to say something similar about the reimbursement. I think making sure that at the beginning of commercialization, you're really thinking through your long-term reimbursement plan at the same time is really important. And a lot of times folks don't have internal people, so getting the right consultants, because the pricing decisions and the clinical decisions that you make will affect the company for years to come. That's something that I
Making
learned.
sure you have a good publication plan and you're getting the right data out of your studies and getting papers out there in the literature that will help build your case for reimbursement depending on the coding
That's
you're
a really
looking
good
for.
point.
There are a lot of consultants, and there are good ones, and there are less good
Yeah.
ones.
Agree.
And a lot of times, some of what the consultants sell is sort of access to payers.
Yeah.
And,
Yes.
very kind of questionable results.
And then just to be fully honest, I mean, a lot of times in the early commercialization stage, sales and marketing folks come to you and say, everybody does blah. I mean, we've all heard it. Everybody does. Why are you opposed to doing this?
Right.
It's often the case that everybody does not do what they are suggesting. So just be wary of that. And right-sizing the compliance program, I think, is important relative to the stage of the company. You can't do what a very large organization does, but you still have to have a program and still be mindful of the laws and the regulations and question what they are suggesting. I still call, Mark or Amanda sometimes and say, I'm being told that this is very common. I've never seen this.
Yeah, we get those questions like at least once a week. So
We had a fun one recently where the marketing person said, well, Coloplast is doing this, and Medtronic's doing this, and some other company we've never heard of. And I'm like, well, let's get Lisa and Amanda on the phone, because Amanda ran compliance at Coloplast. Lisa was in the
just
legal
did it.
department. Amanda also worked at Medtronic, and they were kind of like, oh, dang.
we're like, no, that wasn't
Sometimes
it.
we'll say even, not to be a lawyerly, but we call that hearsay.
Yeah.
Someone his brother-in-law did this. We don't know if a lawyer ever looked at it.
Well, right, exactly. That's the
so
half of the story. Yeah.
We get that literally every day.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question about the compliance program? You brought that up. Mark and his team were getting ready to help us put ours together. And I find that a daunting process in some respects. I was wondering if you two could maybe, talk a little bit about that. Did you build the compliance program in your company from scratch, or did you come into it later?
No, I mean, I came into a relatively developed compliance program, but we've kind of iterated and built on it. I think, is there a pretty basic kind of standard or a basic package of policies that you can implement? You put together a compliance committee, a grant committee, if you do grants, and then just some basic education, I think is those things get you a good start.
Yeah, I mean, for people looking at reviewing this video in posterity that aren't here, I mean, it's like take the AdMed code and that's your P&Ps and build things out of that if you're just trying to do it really efficiently. Of course, we have pretty much any policy or procedure you can think of. It's always best to try and take something that is already exists because it's just more efficient. There's a lot that companies even put online. So there's ways you can find all kinds of good stuff. But to me, it's we always talk with clients. There's like a core group of policies and procedures that we recommend, and from there, it's just a matter of what your business demands are.
And I think what we've done, we start with the kind of core policies, but then in our compliance committee, when a business person raises an issue, we'll go off and sort of study it and come back at the next compliance committee and talk about whatever we learned, but then iterate on the policy. And I think that buys some credibility with the business that you're being flexible and you're looking at what the market practices are and you're calibrating accordingly.
Right. Yep.
But
I don't know. Is my yeah? It is
Yeah.
okay. Thought it went
we
out.
didn't have a program, so we built it over time. That's, I think, an uncomfortable period where you need 6 different programs and you don't have the resources to put in
Yeah.
place
Right.
6 different
Exactly.
programs. So you just have to prioritize and do it over time.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we have clients that come to us and they want to put everything in place at once, and it's like that really is not a good idea because not only is no one going to read any of the policies that you put into place, it's just information overload. So it is, kind of little at a time is probably best. Okay.
We have an online question.
Oh.
It's really long.
Okay. Can you simplify?
Since cybersecurity affects so many, if not all, areas of a company, are there recommendations on organizational structure to address this? In my experience, there are silos between device development, privacy compliance, production equipment, finance, HR, and so on. So just to recap, are there recommendations on organizational structure to address the many different
Right, because
groups?
cybersecurity spans so many different,
I wonder if they have a CISO. That would be one thing that has authority. That reports to the CEO and has authority across the different functions. To deal with it because it is a ubiquitous issue.
And CISO stands for?
Chief Information Security Officer, and I think that's to be distinguished from your chief IT person.
Right, yeah.
Who's getting laptops provisioned and making sure that the things are plugged in properly. But that job, I think I'm going to tell my 2 boys.
Yeah, go for that.
Besides opening a notified
That's a
body,
good point.
it'd be an information security officer.
Yeah.
I think depending on the size of company, many companies don't have CISOs, and then I think that becomes a problem. Is it the IT organization? Is it the product R&D organization that deals with the security risk on the product, depending on the nature of the product? I don't have a good answer for it. I mean, I think I've seen multiple companies struggle with how to structure that responsibility.
I think if you think about the economic threat that cybersecurity poses and how the whole company can go down with one phishing attack, it's an economic thing where you just say, well, look, we've got to devote in our HR budget, we've got to hire people to deal with this because we're protecting our assets, we're protecting our business model, and it's 2022. We've got to live in the present.
No, that's a really good point. Yeah, invest where the risk is. I've seen some clients do like a cybersecurity subcommittee of the compliance committee or privacy subcommittee that kind of reports up. But yeah, I'm sure there's probably lots of different ways, but I like the CISO idea and having reporting structure.
I think also getting regular board communication So,
Yeah.
or the audit
Yeah.
committee
Audit committee, yep.
typically. And then once it's, I mean, it should almost be a quarterly item for the audit committee, and if they're attentive, if you have a good audit committee, they will make sure there's budget for it,
Yeah.
make sure you're doing the right thing.
And it helps to have a product that is that's a cyber type product, like a diagnostic product like ours. You know, one of the things that I learned, you know, they're not on the market yet, but you're going to go to the first person you're going to talk to at a hospital, potential hospital customer with a product like ours is the Chief Information Security Officer of the
100%,
hospital.
yes. You'll
and
get
the
a
person who's in
vendor
charge of the network.
questionnaire
Are you going
about
to be
your-
using our network to
Yeah.
what Paul said?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, well, I've got to take a look at your system and your device, and are you SOC 2 or SOC 2 Type 2, Type 3?
Yep.
If you're going to work with a VA, you know, they've got
Yeah.
entirely different, you know, the NIST level of information security requirements. They've got some of the most stringent requirements as well, and VA is a massive market for some medical devices. And if you want to work with them, so you really have to be thinking in advance, you know, as you're building the product with that in mind. And there'll be nothing to get board attention more than when you're talking about, well, how am I going to make money with this product?
Yeah.
And the initial gatekeeper is the CISO, the hospital. Okay, well, how are we addressing that?
Yeah.
Right?
The other thing you can do from an organizational perspective is get audited. You bring in an outside group, and they do the NIST audit, they do a HIPAA audit, and you know, depending on what the results show, you can draw attention to problems that way.
Right.
Yep. Okay. Are there any other questions online? No? Okay. I have one more question. What keeps you guys up at night? Now, you don't have to give a specific example, but just generally, I'm curious where kind of your head's at these days.
Potential salespeople.
Yeah. What salespeople, just what they're doing or what they're not doing?
Yeah, and education, right?
Yeah.
You know, if you have a field sales force, they're just out there.
Yeah.
You have, how do you stay connected with them? You know, how do you get insight as to what they're doing, what they're saying, educating them, being in sort of regular touch with them?
Yeah.
One of the things I learned to do at a prior company was I was appalled that how many times I had done live training and then later realized that they really didn't remember or understand any of what I trained them on. So I started giving gifts in my training sessions. So you know how you had these questions? I would
Throw out
ask for
candy or
volunteers.
something?
No, I mean, I'd give them like $50 gift cards or like
that
a
will
nice,
get you
like a
learning,
nice
yeah.
mug. And they loved to make fun of me and say, you're bribing us and you're teaching us about anti-kickback. I said, that you're not an HCP, you're my employee. So
I like that idea.
I think it helped in terms of making it more interactive and engaging them in the discussion and the participation. I don't know that it helped them remember when they left what we discussed, but I'm hopeful that it does.
Yeah.
But that doesn't answer your question about what keeps me up
No,
at
that's
night.
I'm not a member of the panel, but I just
What
add
keeps you up?
one thing on that. I've had CEOs come, one in particular that I think the Salesforce kept him up at night, and he said, Mark, I want you to create all of the rules from the training, put them on one page, and then I want it to say essentially that the employee may be fired if they violate the rules, and I want them to sign it, and their bosses have to collect it all and keep it in their file. And I was like, okay. So I've had a couple CEOs since then that like that idea. That's another way. You know, it's a little bit more heavy-handed, but I know this CEO felt that Park Doctrine type of exposure, and they were, you know, getting this close to being bought. And he's just like, I'm not letting anything mess this up. Another thing is if you're using Viva or whatever it may be for your training, we all have to take these trainings, I bet, where there's quiz questions. So, okay, review this complaint handling procedure, whatever, and then you can throw some questions in there. Of course, the sales reps are probably telling each other the answers. But I did experience this firsthand as well as a product manager where there's 180 people in the field that I had to send a message to once a week. And I learned how difficult it was to get their attention, even to open an email, let alone read what's in the email. So another thing that we've done in that, or what I've done since then, is I'll have the sales leader, if the team is doing something wrong, I don't recommend that the GC or the compliance officer always be the one that sends the email out. Have the boss of all of those commercial folks send it out, and implore in that individual how you want everybody to take this very seriously. And the good sales and marketing people they'll answer that call. And sometimes we'll have a requirement for each rep that they have to write back to their boss that they read and understood the message. So just a couple thoughts for you.
I think in the startup context, what would keep me up at night is what you alluded to is, oh, I've got so much stuff to do, and we're hoping to launch by X and such date. And how am I going to do this? I'm a department of one, and I've got a limited budget. That's tough, but everybody's got that. You don't have to be the GC to have to deal with that. But sometimes it's hard in a startup context because you're limited.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep. Did you answer what keeps you up at night?
Come on.
So I don't ever want to be in a position where the company wants to be on the cutting edge of something really exciting, and I don't know how to help them through that.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's what Bill actually had, which is, I'm worried like the future will hold AI and a lot of intelligence, and it's the cutting edge of the law. I kind of dread when and if I'm ever in a position where that could happen. And because, right now I feel like there's good people that I can, call on for experience for things that have already occurred. There's really good resources out there. But for something that's on the cutting edge, I think that's really hard.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point.
Even the FDA doesn't know how to handle
No,
it.
I know.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing about the startups. I've always been attracted to that. Like, oh my gosh, I was with Zeltique Aesthetics, the cool sculpting people.
Oh, yeah.
Were bought by Allergan. And no, I left before they were bought by Allergan. But, we were going sideways with FDA on that.
Yeah.
They didn't know what to do with us. It was so new, and the safety profile was great. Certain exceptions aside these days, but you can't convince the FDA because they don't know what to do with it, and that was difficult. That kept me up at night. But we chose to be in that company.
Yeah.
That,
I mean, it's
ultimately
exciting.
was
but
successful.
Yeah, that's
High risk,
scary
high
and
payoff,
challenging
right?
at the same
exciting,
time.
and you want to help them.
Yes, absolutely.
And then you got FDA approval?
Yes, got FDA approval and went through an IPO and ultimately was acquired. Very successful company. But we were going through the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. All of our board members had psychiatrist couches that they were laying on during our board meetings. Their Rolodexes of their hedge funds were gone. And we couldn't raise any money. And FDA kept telling us one thing one day, and the next thing they tell us something else.
That's frustrating.
And we didn't know what to do and ended up laying off a large number of people before they ultimately got FDA approval. So, the regulatory stuff, if you live in this world long enough, you realize it can control your destiny.
I have a question. So, we kicked off with this park doctrine, right? And, how afraid people should be and not to break the rules. And I want to understand the cybersecurity and the implications of being very afraid. Or is it still, something that we need to do because it's a good idea? Or is there some sort of penalty for the companies who would not be implementing cybersecurity measures?
Do you mean the cybersecurity guidelines from the FDA?
Yeah, for example.
It's sort of like the intersection with maybe criminal misdemeanor liability under
Trying to
park
understand,
for that. Yeah, that's a good question.
We have rules and regulatory that we follow because we want to get our product approved or cleared or whatnot.
Yeah.
We are going to include risk assessment related to that, but ultimately these are kind of the processes that are specific to product development, if you will, but they're not criminal. And so I'm trying to understand, you guys are all lawyers, is there something outside of
I could see it being a misbranding violation if you're having adequate cybersecurity.
Does the panel
False
want to
Claims
take that
Act.
question, or
I
should we
actually-
call,
I mean, it's-
phone a friend?
Yeah, I
here?
was gonna say Paul
Yeah.
might be best suited
It's
to
technical.
answer
It's too
that.
technical for me. That's
Since
when
you're
I
on
would call
board.
Mark.
Well, it seems
Yeah.
like, I mean, it does seem like you have to think about that. And from what Amanda's presentation I learned, you know, there have been a handful of prosecutions under the Park Doctrine, or maybe implied in the prosecution. In those fact patterns that I saw, it seemed like, you know, the companies were doing something wrong.
Yeah.
You could tell there was something bad going on. If there was ignorance on the executive's part, you know, they should have known. They didn't have the right controls in place and everything. And cyber is just part of that now. It's part of the design for certain products.
For sure.
It's a corporate thing as well. So to me, we're living in a world where I think that's inevitably going to be part of it. And I think, you know, Justice and others are going to be considering that among the other menu items when it looks to whether or not you've been doing the right thing. You know, that's just my opinion. But
Alaleh or Mike, did you want to? I could have.
I'd like to phone a friend.
Yeah,
Paul
Paul.
can talk a little bit about the FCA, the False Claims Act, and whether, you know, there's the implied certification theory, and whether a manufacturer could somehow induce a false claim. Is that? I'll leave that to Paul.
Paul's like,
Yeah, just to add to, oh, that's very loud. Just to add to that discussion, I think I did some research to see, you know, is there currently, or has there been any enforcement for cybersecurity failings in a medical device that leads to, you know, criminal liability or any? There's nothing like that that I'm aware of. I certainly, as Amanda said, could see, you know, you design, say, a software medical device and don't address cybersecurity at all, or misrepresent the development of
absolutely,
that
yeah.
device or in some way. Yeah, certainly. I think that goes, though, to Bill's point, if it's obviously bad conduct. I mean, that's going to definitely, whether it's cybersecurity or anything else, the FDA is worried about safety and effectiveness of the device, not cybersecurity specifically. So those things together, I think lead to the possibility of that.
and you may do everything you can to get that FDA approval for a device that's got a lot of cybersecurity considerations, and you've passed that test.
Yeah.
But what about 2 years down the line? You know, every day is a new day in the world of cybersecurity, right? There are new challenges, there are new types of attacks. You know, I hear a lot about zero trust principles these days, and how that's a big trend for many company IT departments and CISOs, that, you know, you have to be able to trust no one, and that takes time and money. So it's not just after you get approved, but you've really got to think about it for the life cycle of the product in the company.
I guess I may be a little cavalier here, but when you talk about, you know, the Yates memo, the Park Doctrine, and I look at all the cases, I tend to think that, you know, like Bill said, these are cases, and it may not even be obvious from the release, but they're cases where there's some element of really bad behavior, right? If it's simple negligence, yes, maybe they get a corporate settlement in those kind of cases, but you know, it's interesting to look how many of them are opioid related, just off the bat. So DOJ is clearly kind of picking and choosing where they wield the kind of heavy.
They have limited resources,
Yeah,
so they
exactly.
have to be
They
selective,
also
and they
do
have
too.
to choose cases they think they can win.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you ever wonder when you read the case summaries or the articles if it's really as bad as they describe?
I know. Yeah.
That's actually something that keeps
Like
me
the
up at night.
complaints and the settlements.
What
Yeah.
if it wasn't as bad as they make it sound, and they're taking it and putting in that light and
That's so
really?
true, though.
I think that's real too.
It's always
Um,
biased, I feel like, yeah.
You know, we were talking about the case that comes to my mind is this Abiomed case, right? Where they investigated for years and years and finally settled for $3 million.
For the meals, you
For-
mean?
Yeah, for
meals,
meals, yep.
And it was 1.5% of their meals
Yep,
were over the limit. So and
Something there.
They couldn't point to anything else, but you know, again, no criminal prosecution of the execs in that case.
Yeah.
But they have to leave with some settlement.
I think that's right, too, yeah.
I can't resist chiming in really quickly. So I'm going through my head and saying, how can I sterilize what I'm about to say enough? Because I have a friend who's a federal judge, and she was involved in a case and shared firsthand that the facts and what you read in the complaint really didn't match up with, and it's the classic, you're only hearing one side of the story.
Yeah, exactly.
And at home, with the kids, if they're fighting, they're like 17 and 18 now, so they're not fighting anymore, luckily. But if you're hearing from one, you're not getting the other side, and you hear the other side, and you're like, okay, you both are going to timeout. But I could say also there was a case involving EB3 some years ago when I worked there, and because Amanda and I and others in the firm will tear complaints apart and read these they're kind of fun to read, actually. Sometimes some of the facts are really pretty wild.
Yes.
But in that case, they were claiming that there was off-label promotion, and without getting into the facts, it involved an atherectomy device, and if a stent strut got in the way of the cutter, you shouldn't be using it in a stent ever. But if somehow the physician got hung up on one, there was a way in which they could reverse the device so you wouldn't have to send the patient in for an open procedure, and they could, die. And the FDA took that the reps having that knowledge as off-label promotion, that they were trained internally on that, how to reverse it, that was off-label promotion. I was like, that's not off-label promotion. That's, the company being responsible, knowing that if someone misuses your device, that patient safety could be, in peril, and the patient could die. So I could say, back to that comment, I do think that you're definitely only getting one side of the story, and a lot of that stuff is they're just whatever they could throw at the wall. Which we would all do if we were prosecutors. You would probably be coming up with every theory you could to try and get the other side to settle.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
panelists. Really appreciate it.